Hello, welcome to a special edition of Inside the Birds. It's Geoff Mosher, and we're really excited about our guest. His name is Brian Wright. He is the head football coach at Timber Creek High School. That's in Ariel, in Gloucester County, South Jersey. And that's really relevant because that is the high school that Eagles first-round pick Jihaad Campbell started off his football career at. And so, Brian, we're really appreciative to have you on the show to talk about your experience coaching the Eagles' most recent first-round pick. You and I were sort of talking before we started recording, and the draft can be a really long Thursday night. And I know you had some real interest, obviously, in where Jihaad was going to go. But I guess as the picks kept going and your eyes were getting droopy there, it was kind of tough, right?
It was. As you said, as the night got longer, it was getting more and more difficult for me to kind of stay glued to it. It was also my wife's birthday, so we had people over. So as we got through the mid round or the mid first round, it was tough. It got to 22, and my frustration and combined with my tiredness kind of kicked in, and I told my wife I think I've had enough. But I have a pretty good feeling he's going to fall to the Eagles, and then woke up to the news that the Birds had drafted him.
Yeah, almost destiny, right? A local kid who I believe you said grew up an Eagles fan, and We were joking that there were some mock drafts that said he might go to the Cowboys, and I can't imagine that would have gone over well with the family. Listen, you go where they pay you, but still, when you have if you got a choice, obviously it would have been the hometown team.
Yeah, no doubt. It was funny, actually. Someone asked me, I think it was the Inquirer, about, him or where we go, if preference-wise. And I said, I have one jersey hanging in my closet, and it's a Jerome Brown jersey. Nice. And, I'll be getting a Jihaad Campbell jersey. And this was a couple of days before the draft. I said, except if he's a Cowboy, then I don't think I could do that. And hang a picture in my office, but that would probably be the extent of it.
There you go. All right. Well, luckily he saved you from having to do that. You heard him say the rich get richer as the Eagles get Jihaad Campbell, a local kid who seems very happy to be able to come back home. Let's get into his high school career because, you took the head coaching job in 2020 at Timber Creek, and that's his junior season. And I think a lot of people think, this guy must have been, you're an NFL athlete. He's probably day one there dominating, but it sounds as if you were getting him at exactly the right time. Tell me about his early years and then when you got to get to him.
Yeah, so early years, he was trying to fight through some minor injuries, but things that kind of kept him off the field, some middle school injuries. Mm-hmm. And, he was kind of working his way out onto the field. He was part of a tremendous Timber Creek program before I had gotten there. With talent at every position, so he was just really trying to find his way out onto the field. And when we got there in 2020 is when we really started to see this kid blossom on both sides of the ball. I mean, he kind of did it all for us offensively and defensively. And, I remember talking with Coach Hinson, who had him his freshman and sophomore years ago, a friend of mine. And he was like, Coach, the Campbell kid is someone to keep your eyes on. He's about to explode. And Coach Hinson didn't lie. It was very quick that summer, which was kind of a crazy summer. It was COVID. I felt like a Pop Warner coach at times. Kids, we weren't teaching in the building. Kids were showing up with their equipment in their parents' cars, and we had like 2 hours with them and, all that stuff. But even through a face mask and all that stuff, he was, a sight to behold. He just kind of carried himself differently on the football field. He moved differently, ran differently, and really kind of prepared differently than most high school kids that I've been around. So,
how do you mean by prepared differently?
Just in terms of like showing up early before practice, and you go out there and you see him working on the bags and pass rush moves. My defense coordinator at the time, Clint Wiley, who was the linebackers coach at Villanova for a while. He was out there when Nova won national championship. But Clint, he was like, listen, I think this kid next level is going to be a linebacker, so we kind of started that transition process, getting his hand out of the dirt and, standing him up. So he was working on some of the things that we'd go over in practice. He'd always stay after practice working on the bags, and then when he got done with us, he would go with his personal trainers. Whether it be strength and agility or just position specific. He kind of, I think he knew he had an opportunity that most people really don't get, and he wasn't afraid to put the work in to see where it took him.
So you take the job that year, 2020. Coach Hinson tells you, look out for this kid. He might be something, but he hasn't really played varsity at that point. What is your first impression of him when you meet him for the first time?
Thank God he's on my team, and I don't have the game plan for him.
So you could tell right away.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see too many kids that are 6'3", 210 pounds at that point, and just kind of rocked up. I mean, he just he looked different, and I had a tough time in my mind, figuring out how a high school offensive lineman was going to block this kid. We put him in some good situations. Not only did we rush him off the edge, but at times we had him covering the other team's best wide receiver. So it was kind of embarrassment of riches on the defensive side of the ball with him. I mean, he was better than your best kid, regardless of what position that kid played offensively.
Do you remember your first conversation with him?
Vaguely. I do know before we really even got started, I had some of the older kids, the upperclassmen, over at my house. And they were in my backyard, and we barbecued. They were in my pool, and just kind of, it was basically just get to know him as a person, not so much as a football player. And that's kind of really what struck me. Was this kid's a great kid. I've seen a little bit of the football stuff. I've been told some of his football stuff, but as a head coach, like, that's the type of kid you want in your program. As a parent, that's how you want your kid to turn out. And very early on, like, that's what kind of struck me as just him being different. Like, always that smile you saw on draft day, that was the smile that you would see on his face nonstop throughout high school. That smile is kind of burned in my mind forever, and that was prior to him getting drafted. But just tremendous young man, and it was never about him. It was always about his teammates, what he could do for me and my coaches to kind of help us out, because none of us knew each other prior to us getting the job. So it was always about the other person, never about himself.
Was he a little bit raw when you first coached him from a refined standpoint? I mean, he had not yet played varsity, so did you have to coach him a whole lot? And how did he take coaching?
Yeah, well, we had to coach him, but you could tell he was well coached prior. Still raw. I mean, he was 15, 16 years old. You're not going to find too many finished products at 15 or 16 years old, especially in our sport. But that's where I give the kid credit. Like, clearly athletically so much better than everyone else, but he just didn't rely on that athletic ability. He was willing to put the work in to see what the highest level he could achieve, and he was a leader in that sense as well. It's always great when your leader is your best football player. It really kind of makes things easy for us as coaches. But he worked, and he got coached, and he took coaching very well. You could ride him, and you couldn't break him. He would test your stamina as a coach in terms of trying to break him down to build him back up, because there was really no breaking him. Like, he just, all right, he was a smile on his face, which would kind of get under your skin a little bit. You're like, we're working for 2 hours in 95-degree heat, and this kid's just smiling back at me saying, yes, sir, no, sir. And that's why when he went to Alabama, I was like, oh, he'll be fine there, because he'll deal with the elements. He'll deal with Coach Saban screaming at him, and probably aggravate Coach Saban because he'll have a smile on his face as he's getting screamed at by Coach. But he's a rare breed.
Do you remember his first game for you?
I do. As a matter of fact, it was against Williamstown High School, who they had Donovan Ezraka on their team, drafted by the Cowboys. I mean, there was talent all over the field. What's his name? I think it's Keon Sabb, who went to Michigan. He was on that team, and he both those guys, but Jihaad, he was all over the field. They had no answers for him. And I remember a good friend of mine who I coached when he was in college was on that staff, and I remember coming over the game after the game. He was like, "Coach Wright, like that Campbell kid's insane. Like we had no answers." I was like, "Yeah, I know. It was clearly obvious. Even with all that talent out on that field that game, he stood out."
Yeah. And you had him playing off-ball linebacker or
off-ball? He, at times, because we ran an odd front, so we were a 3-5-3 defense that year. But there was times where we'd go to a four-man line, and he put his hand in the dirt and get after the quarterback, and he could, like I said, he could play in space. But then put his hand in the dirt. He wasn't afraid to be physical with someone because he was probably stronger than that kid, and I never saw him outclassed regardless of where we put him out on the field.
Right. And I don't know if a lot of our listeners know, but obviously Devin Leary is a quarterback who's been through your program as well. He's now with the Baltimore Ravens. He went to Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, where he played. Was he also on the field for this game with Ezra?
No, actually, his brother Donovan was, who after he left me and graduated, went to Illinois and is now down at Tulane.
Gotcha.
So I think on that field, though, with our guys, there was anywhere from 5 to 7 Division I football players, and I know Williamstown at the time had a good handful as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think South Jersey can pat itself on the back a little bit. I think when you hear about two guys, one being a first-round pick, one being a second-round pick, who some thought were going the first, going against each other, you might think, oh, it must be like Don Bosco versus, Montvale. But, there's some pretty good – there's a lot of South Jersey kids who were drafted last weekend.
There were. Just as someone that's kind of ingrained in the South Jersey football community, like it's a source of pride with the amount of guys that we had drafted. There's a lot of great coaches down here in South Jersey that do a lot of great things for their kids, and it was kind of on display this past weekend.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that year you talked about the first game that he played. Is there a game from that year that really stood out from his standpoint where he was just, like you said, insane?
Yeah, excuse me. It would have been our game against Delsea. For those that aren't familiar with Delsea, South Jersey powerhouse.
Yep.
So man, you watch Delsea play, they come out on the field behind, it seems like an endless number of state championship flags that they all carry out onto the field. We played them. We were shut down the day before because of COVID. We had lost, I think it was week 2. It was Friday, October 9th, 2020. I have the stub right next to me on my desk. It was our first win at Timber Creek. Mm-hmm. So we got shut down the day before. I'm like, man, here we go. We're playing Delsea. We're losing a day of practice. They run the wing T, which, you could use all the reps in the world to replicate or try to replicate in practice. And so we go out to Delsea, and Jihaad puts on a show on both sides of the ball. I was just watching his junior year highlight film earlier today. I was showing it to one of the teachers in the building, and there's a lot of clips from that Delsea game. But what sticks out in my mind in that game is him offensively. Yeah, we had him. He was split out wide, and we ran a slant, and he, once he made the cut in, Donovan put the ball right on the money, and then Jihaad was off to the races. And then he went 70 yards or close to it. The thing that really sticks out in my mind from that is two things: the smile on his face when he caught the ball, and his big self just creating separation between him and the defensive backs. And I bet you by the time he scored, he had a 20-yard separation between him and the DB. And it was just like him coming over the sidelines, laughing and smiling about it. And I don't know what's about that clip. Even before him getting drafted, that comes to mind often in my head. It's just kind of the show he put on, and just it really just showed his overall athleticism, and how he was on such a different level than most kids. That was the first game they had lost in a long time, and then they went on to not lose again for 2 years after that.
Wow.
So that's kind of the level of play that was out on that field, and he was still by far and away the best football player out on that field.
Wow, that's incredible. You're talking about his athleticism. Obviously, he scored. The Eagles are big into your RAS score, your relative athletic score at the combine. He was a 9.85 out of 10, and that's with a bum shoulder that he would wind up getting repaired. Were there any thoughts in your mind of him being any other position than linebacker or edge guy because of what he could do also offensively or anything else?
No, I think you just kind of tell by his body structure that he's going to be a defensive guy. The wide shoulders, long limbs, his explosion. It was just kind of it was almost a cheat code at the high school level. And then not kind of get ahead of ourselves, but when he goes down to IMG and he does it on the national level, still doing the same things he was doing against South Jersey competition, but supposedly against the best of the best, and it was really no surprise to us.
Right. He did go to his senior year at IMG in Bradenton. How did he break that news to you? Was that a difficult?
It was the worst New Year's Day news I've ever gotten in my life. So we had heard rumors, you hear everything, and I remember shooting him a couple of text messages between the end of our season, and through the holidays, and New Year's Day he called me, and when his name popped up on my phone, I kind of I knew what was coming, and I remember I walked out into my garage and I took the call, and I appreciate him because in this day and age when kids transfer, a lot of times they're like the Baltimore Colts, and they're just kind of going and under the cove of darkness. But he was man enough to have that conversation with me, and he was always a little bit more mature than most of the kids he was around. And he pretty much told me, it was a hard pill to swallow, just because selfishly what he brings to the table for your program, especially going into year 2, we were really looking to kind of get this thing established. Year 1 was, like I said, was difficult with COVID. We weren't really around the kids too much. But then, when you had time to kind of sit back, listen, I kind of looked at it as a business decision for him. And if yes, he had every offer under the sun when he was with us. His last game, I remember we walked off the field, and as soon as I got in my office, I had a phone call from Larry Johnson from Ohio State, and, he got his Ohio State offer. So it wasn't a matter of chasing offers. But I guess you want to be around the best. A little bit different when you're competing against 5-star offense tackles in practice than the fat little high school sophomore offensive lineman that's still trying to find his way in the world. So I kind of get the whole iron sharpens iron. Didn't really appreciate it though, because his head coach down there at the time was a very good friend of mine who I played with in college, and we bounced in the city together, and been through a lot of things together. And I never heard a word from him. And then he tried to kind of go around the system a little bit, but at the end of the day, big picture, if that was what he thought was the best thing for him, then I fully support it. And look where things have worked out. How it's worked out for him.
Have you guys stayed in touch since he's been gone?
We have. We've exchanged text messages. I bought some clothing off of his little clothing store last year or the year before, and couldn't wait to show him what we got, and he's still around the building. When he was home, the couple of weeks that he would have to come back home, he would stop by through school. He would talk with my kids in the weight room, and it was those kids. That's pretty cool, just to see the way they would kind of look in awe of him. Even kids he played with the year before, or 2 years prior, he would come back and they would sit around in the weight room, and eyes wide open, and he would kind of tell them how it is. Like, you really want to play major college football, this is what it is. And those a lot of those kids went on to play college football, which I'm not sure if they would have ventured that way if Todd hadn't had that conversation with him or with them. But and then he even though he left us, he came back. He did his commitment or his signing at Timber Creek as well. So
nice.
He's always kind of as I've said multiple times the last week or so, he's ours. We claim him. I'm sure at some point his number will be retired.
Mm-hmm.
We're planning celebration the next week or so at school for him. So he really is. Though he left, he never really left. He's always kind of been a part of our Timber Creek community.
Do you have a favorite story about Jihaad Campbell? Something that always sticks out, whether it's on the field or off the field, that you?
It's not so much a story, but I'm always kind of struck by how he always would be working with the younger kids. The freshmen and the sophomores or the little kids that would come watch our practice. Timber Creek's a little bit different because of the traditions that have been built, through Coach Hinson prior to me. And we always have a good handful of people that would watch practice and little kids that would come watch practice. And Jihaad would always somehow make way or make his way over there and make time to interact with those kids, whether it just be picking up a football and having a catch with them, or staying after practice, helping the younger defensive linemen or linebackers or wide receivers just kind of elevate their game. And it was pretty neat when I was over at his press conference on Friday. Seeing him, there was some, I don't know if they were season ticket holders or whatever, but there was a handful of those in the room we were in. And, there was a lot of little kids in there, and just the way he interacted with them, I was like, this is the same kid that I would see, at our practices. Fame and the spotlight has not changed him. I think it's kind of only opened his eyes more to what he can do to help out, within the community and be someone for these little kids to kind of look up to.
Right. So now he's in the NFL, Brian, and we see not only the Eagles, but other teams really going toward, I don't want to go full-blown NBA here, but not positionless, but multi-positional guys, whether it's in the back end of a defense or the front end of a defense. And Howie Roseman said, hey, don't put this guy in a box. He's not necessarily an off-the-ball linebacker. He can rush the passer as well. But he also is going to get an opportunity, as we understand it, with Nakobe Dean out for quite a bit to play both. So how do you think this is going to unfold for him? Where do you see him, maybe even 2 or 3 years down the road?
Yeah, well, again, I think you kind of hit it on the head there. You can't put him in a box. He kind of is a Swiss Army knife. He has the skill and the ability to play in space or play in a confined space. And his athleticism, his size, and his strength is really going to present problems regardless of where you line him up at. He's going to be able to get the edge on tackles. But then he can guard the tight ends down the field as well. And he can play in space. And I think you kind of saw a little bit of that when he was playing, at Alabama, which was another reason why I wasn't surprised the Eagles drafted him, because he kind of seems to be the type of guy that Howie goes after. Yep. Just not a, one-trick pony. He's going to be the answer to a lot of questions defensively, because you can put him in different situations and have success with him.
Right.
Even though it was the high school level, it's the same thing we tried to do. Just kind of, like I said, we would match him up against the other team's best wide receiver. Is he going to line it up against best wide receiver in the NFL? No, but the tight ends have certainly become a valuable weapon in the NFL, and he's a guy that will be able to match up against the best of the best at that position and be successful, thus allowing other guys to be freed up to make plays. And he's the type of kid too, like, he doesn't search out the spotlight. So as long as he's doing his job and his teams are winning, you're going to see that big smile. So
nice. I tell you, with a guy with that kind of speed and explosion, it would be, we already know he can play off ball. We already know he can line up the edge. If they could even kick him inside in a 4-man rush kind of like a NASCAR package, and see if
Yep.
he can beat guards and centers. Talk about an irreplaceable type of player there.
Yeah. Again, he's going to provide some matchup issues. I'm a guard trying to block him, and as he's rushing either A gap or B gap, his athleticism. Again, I think it does come down to his athleticism. Is going to create some issues for them, especially with the guys that they already have there.
Right.
He's not just a complimentary player, but he will play off of the strengths of Jalen Carter and those guys inside. And that's the thing with the guys they already have. You have matchup issues, and now you're putting him out there along with Nakobe Dean when he gets back out there, and those other pieces. It's Coach Fangio is going to have a lot of fun, putting him in position to be successful.
100%. Oh man, only 1 year with him. I'm sure it's every coach's dream and nightmare. You want that year with the guy, but then you get greedy and you'd love to have more, right?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you kind of get used to, as a high school coach, even when I was coaching college, like your guys come and go, like that's what they do, and I am so grateful for that time, like even before this draft, even before his success at the college level. Just to have, like I said, when I started out, like have a kid like that in our program and to be able to interact with him on a daily basis, truly blessed to be a part of that process. And it would have been great to have him, his senior year, especially with some of the guys that we had coming back that year. But I guess it wasn't meant to be. But now, listen, Sundays I can turn on and you turn on Fox and watch him running around, with team I grew up rooting for, and that's pretty cool. That is, as really a dream come true for him and for everyone else around. Like, to be honest, everyone in the building in school, like every time I walk out in the hallway, which the last 2 days try to stay in my classroom a little bit more than I usually do, just because it's tough getting from point A to point B right now because everyone wants to talk, and it's just cool how truly proud everyone is, at Timber Creek of Jihaad.
Absolutely. Now you guys get a little claim to fame. Now we know right down the road from you guys is Highland Regional, right? Yeah. And I think their claim to fame is Mike Daniels, the defensive tackle who played for the Packers for a while, and I think he's even there coaching. But now you guys got your own defensive player that you can tell this is our guy.
Yeah, this is our guy, and Mike's a great guy. Mike actually helped me out 2 years ago, which was pretty cool. He'd show up with his Bengals helmet at times, and working with one of our defensive linemen. But yeah, now we have our own guy. And as much as I love Mike, he can stay on that side of Hickstown Road and do what he's got to do with over there. We got our own guy. Just in terms, because same school district and whatnot, it's such a great moment for the district that to be able to produce these type guys. And again, same thing with Mike, or just like Jihaad, like Mike's such a great guy, gives back to the kids in the community. And I'm sure Jihaad will do the same exact thing, just type people they are.
100%. Brian, thanks so much. Again, Brian Wright, head coach, Timber Creek High School, where Jihaad Campbell went. Tell us what's in store for the Chargers this upcoming season.
Hey, we have a very exciting team coming back. We have a really good group of kids coming back. We have a younger group that a lot of them were forced to play a little bit last year. We've had a great offseason. We have a big tackle who just committed to Penn State.
That's cool. I'm happy.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah. So we have, we still have some guys. So we're excited. I actually just came from our player parent meeting tonight. There's a lot of excitement around the program. So we're excited to kind of build on this excitement and carry it on to the field this summer into the fall.
All right. That is awesome. We will all say, go Chargers. We wish you guys the best of luck. Brian Wright, head coach, Timber Creek High School football. Really appreciate the time that you spent with us. Thanks. And we're going to have you on down there. When Jihaad goes out there, has 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, an interception, runs one back, 80 yards for a touchdown. We'll have you come by and talk about it.
No doubt. Can't wait.
All right, great, Brian. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me. Go Birds, go Chargers.
There you go. And thanks for everybody for watching this latest Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher along with Brian Wright. Thanks again for watching.